All right. So we're here, Madcap Podcast at the 2025 Pararescue reunion. It's kind of nostalgic. what was it, 19? You had the idea to start
Yeah, it
interviewing
was 2021.
21
Yeah.
in Tucson. And then we did our first in person in Kentucky. We had the PJ Association and ourselves paid for a production company to help us out. But this year we got Monte Williams and Ben Brunicki, both freaking PJs,
Yeah.
recording and editing the audio. So it's cool just having like the boys, just a team of PJs kind of doing this together. But yeah, so we're here in Vegas. We got Chuck McGrath or McGrath.
Yeah, he's a McGrath. I use McGrath.
And then my Andrew Lucero and Nick Adagio here. So thank you. Our first interview this week. So that's exciting. It's always good just being able to sit down one-on-one and actually do this in person as opposed to over Zoom or something like that. So thank you for taking the time. If you'd like to just introduce yourself real quick and we'll get started.
Where you want to start? Chuck McGrath. I live in Virginia Beach now. I came in the Air Force in March of '70 at basic. And at that time, I knew nothing, absolutely nothing about pararescue. Showed up at basic at Lackland. Some guy stands up in the briefing in a classroom. He's, I want to tell you about pararescue. And it was Tommy Miles. I'd been around a long time, he was recovering from injuries. So he was down there doing the recruiting. So I want to tell you about pararescue, this and this and this. If you're interested, sign the sheet and we'll have a briefing tonight. I go up, sign the sheet. He looks up at me, he says, "Can you swim?" I said, "Well, I was a lifeguard for 5 years. I didn't ask you if you were a lifeguard, I asked you if you could swim." So one thing led to another. I went through all the PT tests and everything and ended up at Eglin, probably about May time frame of '70. And then we had a preconditioning there at Eglin. We had jump school, scuba school, jump school at Bragg, then scuba school at Key West, the underwater swimmer school. And then we had survival school up in Fairchild. Then we went down to Shepherd Air Force Base, Wichita Falls. And that was the extent of our medical school back then, aside from transition school. So we finished up that. That's where I met my future wife. So she was studying to be a medic. I met her at the Airmen's Club in October. We got married later on in May, just before I left for Southeast Asia. Then we got back, had transition school, mountain climbing in Dahlonega. In Georgia, and we finished up. My class graduated in February, first week in February, I guess, of '71. And then helicopter school for the 53s. Ended up getting married on the 1st of May in '71. I left on the 14th, got jungle survival school, then got to Thailand the end of May in '71.
And where in Thailand were you?
Started off at Udorn. Okay. The outfit was still at Udorn, and then we moved to NKP the middle of July of 1971. And so that was that. So then my wife, she did assignment to joint spouse. She ended up at Karat, which is about 200 miles north of Bangkok. So she was about 250 miles southwest of where I was. But she used to get hops back and forth, and I'd come back from flying and she'd just be in the room one day. She'd gotten a hop with somebody, Scat Back or the Freedom Bird. And so she'd be there, and depending on what time of day it was, Sometimes we could go downtown. Other times it was too close to curfew, and my roommates would find someplace else to stay for the night, and we'd have the hooch. I had four roommates at that time: Chuck Morrow, Gary Osborne, Mike Nunes. And other times, I showed you the picture of our alert shack up on the flight line, and nobody was ever using it. It was just a couple trailers. We even stayed up there one night. Yeah. And we had Christmas or New Year's in Bangkok, R&R and Pattaya Beach. So it was pretty good unless something was going on, and I was supposed to call her every night. And if I didn't call her on time, I called her from some funny places.
That's pretty unique kind of story.
It was,
as
yeah.
far as having your wife there, especially.
As far as I know, I'm the only one that was ever stationed over there on a team and whose wife was in the service on orders and stationed over there at the same time.
Did you guys stay over there through 71 and 72, or did you come back to the States?
Well, I matched up her Deros. She got there the middle of July. So normally I would have left the end of May if I was just on a 1-year tour, but I extended to match her Deros. So we were scheduled to leave, and we ended up leaving on 15 July of 72. So I did 14 months, Candy did 12.
Okay. And then where did you end up being stationed afterwards?
I had orders to go to Eglin, and we were sitting there we were trying to match up orders and everything, and what do you know? Here comes this message. It basically said, we're looking for junior NCOs leaving Southeast Asia to join up with the team in Hawaii. What do you think? We had each spent 2 years as kids in Hawaii. So yeah, we were all set. So we ended up going to Hawaii to an outfit that we caught satellites. Back then you didn't have digital. You had satellites were up there, they took pictures, put them on film, and they'd have a canister, they'd pop it off. They'd come down, they have planes that were supposed to fly along and catch the parachute and tow it in, reel it in. If the plane tore through the chute or there was a malfunction, then we'd either, the guys on my team, our team, would either go out, if it was within our helicopter range, because we used to go TDY out, take old Navy helicopters out to ships. If it was close enough to the helicopter range, we'd go out and get it with the helicopter. If not, we had several missions where the guys would have to jump in, just like the old photos you see with, Vargas and, old time, Jim, jump. But it was tough duty. But yeah, a couple days a week, at least a couple days a week, you go out and you jump into the ocean. You spend the rest of the day diving.
Yeah. Was that you did that with Willie, right? In Hawaii.
Who?
Was that Willie Robertson?
I think so.
Is he on the name of that satellite program? What was it called? It starts with a C.
Crested Rooster.
Okay. I think he was doing different jumps.
We had 6594 Test Group as the outfit.
Okay.
And we've got a couple of guys that, he brought me some coffee.
Of these stories where you jumped in to grab the canister, couldn't find it, had to wait a couple of days to get picked up by a ship.
Oh, that wasn't us. I mean,
Okay.
they definitely knew where we were.
Like a sweet setup. How long were you guys out there for? Or, Hawaii?
On that one, we ended up staying there for 5 years.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't mind us just extending to fill our slot.
Let's try to get that back. So in Southeast Asia, your first duty station, did you have any notable rescues or missions that you want to hit on?
Where do you want to start?
Chronological order.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, if you take everything chronologically, I mentioned the outfit was moving from Udorn to MKP in mid-July. So early July, that second week, Pappy Lacasse was the NCOIC when I was at UDorn. And I told him Candy was coming in. He said, fine, get a hop. I went down. I walked in. Now, you understand, back then, we wore no signature. The guys flying out of Thailand, you didn't wear a name tag. You didn't have any signature. You had nothing. You just had a pair of camis and a beret. That's it. So I walk in down there, 22-year-old guy, and I go up, and I said, and I said, my wife right there. And he said, hey, she's yours. So we went downtown. There was 2 motels that the guys usually stayed at, either the Metro or the New Haven down in Bangkok. So we stayed there overnight, went up to Karat the next day. And then I went back to UDorn, but then because of the transition we had, they put 2 crews on a 6-day alert rather than a 2-day or 3-day alert, just to cover the transition of the move and everything else. In the middle of that, I was teamed up with a guy named John Holberg. And in the middle of that, they had a Buffalo drone go down way up north. And they decided to send us out. For one reason or another, they sent us out as a single ship with a couple Sandys, A1s. Single ship was one of the keys here. And one thing led to another, and there was some ground fire, and they attributed it to ground fire later. But we were in the final hover. We had a sling hooked up to this drone. John was down on the ground. They were just getting ready to hoist him up. I was on the ramp, and all of a sudden the helicopter just fell out of the sky. I mean, just down the hill, and it rolled over a couple times, ended up upside down. So if the guys ever ask, don't slack. Because the guy you end up saving might be your partner. He lost both sides of his face. Rotor blade caught him and just peeled the whole side of his face clean away. And flight engineer got a broken pelvis. He never flew again. Pilot and co-pilot were okay. They were strapped in. But I started an IV on him, and they finally got Air America Huey came in, got John, got the flight engineer. I hopped on, and they already had a pilot, co-pilot, and I guess they had an engineer, somebody, not a whole lot of room. And the guy reaches over and punches me on the shoulder and says, out. I mean, I think later they figured it was about 7,000 foot altitude. And I guess he just couldn't lift off. He made me get off so they could take off. He H-34 come in, pick up the pilot and co-pilot. Of course, voice comes down. I did everything I was supposed to do, put the horse collar on the right way so I don't fall out. I'm ready. I go up about 5 feet. I'm looking up at the guy in this helicopter. This is Air America. Looking up, and it stops. What's going on? And he says, they hovered down, and he said, it broke.
Oh my God.
So I'm sitting there out in the middle of this clearing, and John had heard some ground fire, but I didn't see anybody. So I'm sitting there and call Sandy. We'll have somebody there in a few minutes. Okay.
And you're alone at this point?
I was all by myself. There was a Raven forward air controller flying up and around, and then finally another H-34 came in. They took us over to Luang Prabang, which is up on the northwest side.
How long were you on the ground for?
Oh, I don't know, 45 minutes, an hour.
And you had 2 failed extracts, one from a hoist, one because of no power to take you out, and then you finally got out. Okay.
Yeah, and they told me later I made the jungle survival board, and it was either Clark or must have been Fairchild. I guess they had some board. People that went through survival training and got picked up by helicopter, so you got on there. But yeah, so got that, and we finally got an Air America flight back to Udorn. Spent the night there. And a few weeks later, they called me up from operations, says, come and pick up your Purple Heart. So they had a Purple Heart in the inbox for me to come and pick up. Yeah, I was like, okay. All I got was a bunch of bruises, but I got a Purple Heart in the water.
You got a Distinguished Flying Cross off of that one too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. But then, after that, pretty much nothing was happening, because we weren't bombing up north and things, there's a few things that went on, but it was kind of being a beach lifeguard, 95% of the time, nothing. So I didn't have another real mission, I guess, until March time frame of 72. We had a Spectre that went down, and they launched just about everybody. And who was I with that day? I was with Don Goodlett. And it was the first pickup for the pilot. I don't know, you might have heard the name Dale Stovall.
No, I haven't.
He retired as a brigadier, but he's the one that picked up Oyster 01 Bravo, who was down for 23 days. It was his first mission, so they hover in and they guide us, and then Captain Stovall, he starts coming out, and the Raven says, well, where are you going? He says, well, pull it out. He says, no, I got more over here. So, I mean, he popped us from place to place, and we ended up picking up 8 guys out of this gunship. And overall, they ended up picking up all 15 guys. But that was the first time I went down on the ground. They had a guy that had a fractured leg, and we stopped. They put me down, and I get about halfway down, and I'm in the middle of the trees. And all of a sudden, we're not just standing still. We're going forward, and they're dragging me through the trees. So they put me down in the wrong spot. So they moved me over to the right spot, and then they put me back down, and we got the guy out. So we got that. So we got 8 guys there. My roommate Chuck McGrath, I think he got 1 or 2. So that was March. Then, I guess in the April time frame, there was a RF-4 reconnaissance. And I remember when this happened, I don't know who I was with, but we were up in northern Laos on orbit, just because it's what you did when you're on alert. You went up. I don't know particularly what was going on, but you usually just kind of sat on alert for a couple of days, and then the third day, you'd go up, you'd fly over the fence, and you'd do an orbit. And in this case, it was a north orbit, out north of the Plain de Jars. And usually you'd hear on guard, Cosmic 16 Bravo, come up on guard, Cosmic 16 Bravo. And we were all the way up north, and this guy had gone down in the southeast corner of North Vietnam. No contact. I don't think they got any contact with him for at least 3 days, but he had been Ian. So we end up going, we end up on alert again, and then it ended up, we were on the crew, Chuck McGrath and I were on the crew, and our other 2 roommates were on the Heiberg. So Intel says, well, here you are at NKP, and this is where the guy is, and they had given him instructions like, do what Horace Greeley said, which is go west, young man. So he had landed on the outskirts of Dong Hoi, which is a pretty good sized city. So he ends up in the mountains. His partner, his front seater, had been captured. So they come up with this plan, and there's a couple passes over there where all the North Vietnamese ran their trucks through. There's Magia Pass and Ban Carai Pass. So their idea was, well, we'll go over in the mountain range and we'll come in right along the ridge line and go directly over the pass. That'll be the shortest exposure. So, okay, go over, come right over that pass, come right over the second pass. We get down there, it's too cloudy. Can't pick him up. Turn around and come back. So the next day we do the same thing. Only this time we managed to get him out. And, you talk about things that you learn much later. Are you familiar with a man named Daryl Whitcomb? I'm not, no. Okay. You look up his name. He's done any number of books on, he retired as an Air Force as a colonel, but he was heavy into doctrine. He's a tremendous researcher, and documents things just thoroughly. He wrote the definitive rescue of Bat 2-1.
Okay.
All right, so not the one they did the movie on, but the real deal. Mm-hmm. And then he wrote another one. If you're interested in some that he had one on the desert, air war and so on. But one of his latest books is called The Moral Imperative, Combat Rescue and the End of the War in Vietnam. And that he documents everything. So he's got that in there. But it turned out the guy we rescued was his boxing sparring partner at the academy.
Okay.
When they went through the academy. So that was the tie-in there.
What was the rescue like? And I know
nothing. It was nothing at all until we started back. We caught no ground fire. We hit that second pass, the lower one called Ban Carai, and it looked like the truck stop on I-95. Oh my God! When I say nothing happened, not to us on the helicopter, but the Sandy pilot kind of got in a duel with the SAMs. He said the SAMs were shooting up at him, and he actually he hit the stick. He said he bounced his helmet off the canopy, and the SAM went over and blew the top of the ridge line off, and he says, I got so upset at him, I rocked back and I punched off both pods of rockets toward the city. So I don't know how many rockets that is, but he launched a lot of rockets toward
more than a couple.
More than a couple. But as we came across that Ban Carai Pass and saw that truck park, I had a Sandy right behind me. I was on the tail, and I couldn't shoot anything. But the guys that were on the other chopper told me later. Said, we asked him, "Can we shoot?" He said, "Hell yeah!" And the Sandys just dropped all kinds of stuff, and I think we caught some ground fire as we crossed Magia. But we got to the other side, and they had all kinds of code words for which direction we were going to take. He said, well, whatever we say, we're going to do the opposite kind of thing. And so we got over the safe area, and we let the survivor, he'd been down for 7 days, about 7 days. We turned him loose on a minigun, let him shoot up the cars. He got a big kick out of that.
For the rehearsal like that, that's awesome.
Yeah, he really loved that. But then, it was, by then they were getting ready to start bombing up north again. And, look, quite a few things were going on. We did a lot of traveling back and forth and a lot of flights into North Vietnam. There were days that, shortly before my last mission, we were shuttling back and forth. We had 2 birds go in, 2 out, and then when these 2 birds needed fuel, we'd hit the tanker, we'd fuel up and go in and kind of swap out. And it was kind of bad because, you know, at one point four of us ended up there at one time. Then they pulled us all out. And I guess we just went through the same exit area too many times because they were waiting for us. And as one flight engineer, Harry Cash, got shot in the rear end, and he was in bad trouble. We ended up, and the helicopter was just draining fuel, hydraulics, and everything. We ended up landing at a Lima site. And short version of it is one of the co-pilots had the same rear blood type that Harry had, and there happened to be a tied in with the CIA, Air America, or whatever, dock at this Lima site, and they did a direct blood transfusion on Harry, and got him out. We had that one, and then nothing really happened for me. There was a few other missions I didn't get involved in. And then on the last mission that I had, the end of June, I mean, there were some big missions that happened. And unfortunately, I just wasn't part of them. It was one of these things we had. It was just a few days after Harry was hit. We had MidCap. This last mission was a MidCap, and they had got nailed. Some MiGs snuck in behind them and caught them. Went down. And so it's kind of thing. We thought we had a problem with our helicopter. We ran over to Udorn. Everything was squared away. We were okay. So, you know, they swapped a few helicopters around. So, yeah, first two went up and got one guy, and then they had us go in after Lynn Aikman. Now it's the book I showed you. The guy wrote the book. Yeah, so we had that one. And, you know, one of the things I talked to Tom Newman about it, who, you know, had been over there, and I mean, this was a couple of years ago. We talked, you know, there was no, you know, if you get yourself in this situation, this is kind of what you ought to do, or try to avoid this or do that, you know, and something. And, you know, honestly, I was, when you're talking about being concerned, I was concerned because I had tree limbs that big around falling down on top of me. Mm-hmm. All around me. If they'd hit me, it'd all been a whole different story.
Do you want to go through what happened on mission? Is that the Air Force Cross mission? Yeah,
it was Air Force Cross mission. They knew where the Sandys knew where the guy was, where Lynn was, and I was number one, you know, and it was just like, you know, like you say, you flipped a coin, you know, and if you made the call, you got your choice. So I mean, I was number one, and Chuck Morrow was number two, and we had a flight engineer on there. And
does that mean number one, you're going down?
Number one would man on a H-853. Number one mans the left window in the gun, and if somebody needs help, that's the one that goes down. And number two stays on the tail unless something happens. So yeah, so we found him. They said he needed help. He was hurt. He says, "I'm under my chute." We could hear on the radio, "I'm under my chute, under this big tree." Well, you know, we're flying in, say from your angle, we're flying in, and, you know, Sandy says, "Okay, now, you know, come around to your left." And as we come around, I could see I saw the smoke and called it out. And then the pilot started to make like a 270 right-hand turn. And I called out, and Chuck then guided us back into the smoke. We couldn't see from the helicopter, but he's right. He says big tree. Well, there's this huge tree. It must have been 3 feet in diameter, but the problem was it was about 200 feet high, and a lot of smaller trees. So we did a radio check, made sure they could hear me using the patch cord radio we had. And so I was set. They put me down, and I mean, you might have seen the stories about that bamboo, but it was fierce. It didn't look that bad from up there, but you get down into it, and all of a sudden you're in 12-foot high bamboo upside down, and you can't move. I mean, there's nothing you can do. So fortunately, I said, pick me back up. So he picked me back up. I got turned right side back up, and he put me back down. I was able to get away from the penetrator, and I E&E'd over to the tree, and I pushed some bushes around, and there he was. He was laying down beside the tree. So he was hurting. His lower right leg was pushed in about 4 inches here, and it turned out his elbow was fractured. I mean, his face was all black and blue. He was going pretty fast when he punched out, I guess. And I don't know exactly what happened, but from where he was, he could have just come down underneath the chute and slammed into the side of the tree and then gone down. But
Was he conscious?
semi-conscious, yeah. I mean, he was breathing okay. It was a little bit too noisy to really do anything. Shout into his ear, and so I looked up, and I could hear him on the helo. You could hear the engineer saying, I can't see him. I can't see him. I mean, I could look up and I could see him, the engineer, leaning out the door, and I could see him, looking down through the canopy. But I'm under all these, the bushes and undergrowth, and they had moved because they knew I was going to be going over by the tree, because that's where the pilot said he was. But at that point, my concern was all of a sudden we got, if you ever cut down a tree, you know what a mess it makes when the top of the tree lands. The top of the tree was coming down on top of me. So I wanted to get away from it. So I just told Len, I'm going to drag you, because there was a hill, pretty good slant on the hill, 30 degrees or so, I guess. I don't know. And so I started dragging him away from the tree and away from all the limbs falling down on us. And it was about that time something didn't sound right. I had never been on the ground, with gunfire, except the firing range, or when we were just out, just practicing. But it didn't sound right. So I called out that I think you're getting ground fire from 4 o'clock. Well, I didn't know they were getting ground fire for more than just 4 o'clock.
The entire clock.
Some house in the helicopter.
Yeah, so
Chuck.
We go.
no, nobody ever, said it might have been a trap or what, but the thing was they were getting ground fire. So I was, and they were having problems hearing me. Sandy was saying, use the survivor's radio, and, I don't understand it. What we had was just a rudimentary, they had the URC 64 as our primary one, but we had these patch cords rigged up to these other radios into our helmet. And so they were having problems hearing me, but I started dragging him. We went down to the ravine, and then they moved back, and they saw me, and they lowered the penetrator. The penetrator came down, and it got tangled up with some bamboo, and I heard them talking about problems, hydraulics, one thing or another, and then So we got something about the penetrator coming back up, and I'm saying, just pull it up and pull it free, because they couldn't get it down to me through the underbrush and everything. And next thing I know, here comes the penetrator. And about 100 feet of cable, 200 feet of cable, just, oh shit. Yeah, so, yeah.
Did you fly it? Was that a single bird? Or did you guys have?
No, we had the hybrid.
They shear the cable on it?
They shared the cable.
Oh my gosh.
What's going through your head when they shear the cable and then there's enemy in the area?
I might not get out of here.
Yeah.
I mean, I joked about it later. I said, I said, I knew you guys weren't going to leave me there, because not one of you was going to have to answer up to Candy, my wife,
Yeah.
and say why you were down there. Because they had already been through that once, because when I went down with John Holberg after that drone, and we ended up, I didn't get to, she kept calling from Karat, wondering why I hadn't called her that night. And the guys kept on telling her, well, he's over at Udorn. And she'd call Udorn. Udorn said when he was over at NKP. And then she never let him forget it.
How'd you end up getting out?
Well, and I can hear them talking, and they were concerned that the first bird might be disabled, and have to land. So they had the high bird come in and follow them as they went out. So, this whole time, and you know what a minigun's like when you're holding the triggers. Well, I tell you, when you're about 80 feet underneath it and that thing's going off over your head, it's a whole different viewpoint.
Pretty cool.
Well, I was just hoping Chuck wouldn't get a shoot me.
The sound of freedom, or we'd be like, right here.
Yeah.
I was calling in Cass.
Well, I called where I thought it was coming from.
Yeah.
But later on, the Sandy lead, Jim Harding, and I don't know if you're familiar about the museum, Air Force Museum, opened up a new exhibit, Combat Rescue in Southeast Asia, back in June of 23.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the old forward air controllers, the Sandy pilots were there, and now this is over 50 years later. Colonel, now retired as a colonel, he was a major then. He was in charge of the Sandy squadron at the time. He said it was the one time in all the rescue missions that he worked on that he could actually see the bad guys on the ground that he was shooting at. All the rest of the time it was just, guys are here, you shoot, And I could hear him making his runs. He says, I'm coming in 20 millimeter and minigun, and he'd come down one side. And so I was just, I tried to put the F4 pilot, Lynn Aikman, I just dragged him underneath a bush, trying to keep him hidden. And so the high bird came by and just followed him out. And there wasn't anything you can do. You got to stand by. And after a while, they came in, and they knew where I was. So they came in to the hover, put the hoist down. I put, he was then Captain Aikman, put him on the hoist, and I strapped him in, and I actually strapped myself in, and they started up. But later on, it was just, as we got to the door of the helicopter, you'd see they're just, picking up the side of the helicopter, and they ended up they shot out the intercom. So at the tail end, the flight engineer had no intercom. Number one PJ, Al Wright, got hit in the leg trying to help pull me in. So he's laying on the deck, and he had a gas mask on because they had thought about using that gas that makes him sick. And he had already had his mask on, but the combat photographer helped Rick Simon, who's the engineer, pull us in, and we were laying there for about a minute. All of a sudden, I get this. Lean down, Captain Aikman says, "Can you get off of me?" Yeah. So we got him up and started and looking at him, and he got shot in the foot as we were I guess right about the bottom of the door. So I got my arms around him, and the citations, help to protect him because he put his arms around me. Well, hell, we're like two kids on a swing. Yeah. We got our feet right beside each other, and the poor man gets his foot shot. I get nothing.
Well, so I guess I had a question on that. So one of the only moments you don't have control is when you're on and off that hoist, right? Going down and going up. You're the target. The North Vietnamese are saying, now or never, boys. Got to get this helicopter down. Got to kill these guys. What's the feeling like that you're in someone else's hands and you're just completely alone, unprotected on a hoist going?
There's nothing you can do.
But what did you feel like in that moment? Were you like, here we go, this is it?
I hope we make it up. Yeah. There's nothing. It was what you go through so many times in training.
Yep.
It was. Yeah. You knew it was a bad situation. But yeah, it was just adrenaline. A lot of adrenaline, especially when you see the holes open up.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh.
So was it straight to work once you got in the aircraft, like started treating and?
Yeah, pretty much. We believe. Honestly, we had nowhere near the medical that you guys get today. No, it was almost nothing. But yeah, he was doing okay. He was breathing okay. But we didn't, we made sure all that, he was semi-comfortable and then it was a bit later, after we finally went through everything, that we saw he had the hole in his foot. And with Al, he was Tech Sergeant Wright, we went to try and put a pneumatic splint on his leg, but they all had holes in them. so that didn't work. And then the guy that was number 2 on it was one of my other roommates, also my classmate, Mike Nunes. And he after we got back, he said, "Oh, do you feel those shell casings that I was dropping on you?" "No." "Why?" "Well, I wanted you to see the guys that were coming down the trail after you." "Okay, well, what'd you do, Mike?" "Well, I shot him." So yeah, he got a kick out of it. Evidently, he was dropping empty casings on top of me, trying to get my attention to let me know, like I could do anything, Because I remember I hadn't taken down my Car 15, because I remember we had a very senior NCO named Ted Hawkins, who was one of my instructors when I was going through school, and we had seen some of the videos, combat photography. And I asked him, I said, "Should we take a rifle down when we go or not. He says, the one thing that's going to get you out of there is batteries. He says, as long as you got battery, I used to carry 6 batteries. And so no, I didn't take a rifle. It would have been hard to keep on to it
Did you
anyway.
have a sidearm? Or
Oh yeah, but they issued us 38s. Yeah, it was pretty much useless.
How close to the enemy were you?
I never saw them myself, but you know, I guess, you know, the co-pilot on the helicopter, because they were hovering into the hill, less than 100. He said they were shooting directly into the. He said it was less than 100 feet.
Oh wow.
Away on the hill shooting in, and I guess because of the way Mike was talking, you know, not far, and I don't know exactly because I never saw him myself, but I know we were, you know, pretty busy coming out of there, and I mean it just seemed, you know, then you start hearing things. I remember we must have refueled, and then they started out with MiG warnings, and you see mentioned in that book that I showed you, Taking Fire, the one Kevin O'Rourke wrote, reference to it, and you also see it mention of it in Daryl Whitcomb's book, The Moral Imperative. Same thing is that our radar folks were tracking MiGs coming out and coming in on after us. Well, there's a fellow that's famous as an ace, Steve Ritchie. Well, it turned out he was up at the tanker, and they just did some dummy phone calls. He said, you know, Roger, X mile, you know, X out, you know, making my run in, and the MiGs broke off because they knew who they. I hear tell, you know, that they were good enough at what they did that they knew who he was, knew his call signs, heard him say, "I'm making my run in," and the MiGs broke off. So then Captain Stovall asked, you know, where should we go? Should we go to UNORN or NKP? What's our status? And yeah, at that point, my recommendation was go to NKP, because if we go to UNORN, then we've got 2 helicopters that need maintenance, and they're going to have to be shuttled crews over to fix the helicopters, you know, and then plus you got the air crews, and you're going to end up, you know, we can go to, so we went back to NKP. So.
You still have a relationship with this pilot, or do you have a relationship with any?
I'm very close.
You guys are.
Yeah, very.
I can imagine.
This leads into a follow-on, because I ended up from Hawaii. I went into a commissioning program. I got commissioned in November of '79. Got stationed at the Pentagon. So we got there in December 1979. So, and I was involved with supporting the command center at the Pentagon. And, you know, other things. So, I forget which came first. I was in the cafeteria there at the Pentagon one morning with a friend, and this tall, lanky guy comes in. And he stands over me and he looks down. Says, "Your first name Chuck?" "Yeah, yes, sir." He was a major. It was Rufus Hutchinson. He was the co-pilot on the helicopter that picked me up.
Really?
So that's Rufus. And I think he was still a second lieutenant when he was a co-pilot on that bird. So he says, yeah, and I don't know how he knew it, but then he said, then Colonel Eggman was going to be stationed there at the Pentagon pretty soon too. And then another day, I'm in the command center and I look down as I'm coming out, and it was an exercise that was going on. And there was a note on a desk, and it says, "If you need J3, call Lieutenant Colonel Stovall." Well, Stovall's not a real common name. So I took the number down, and I'd call it, and it was Captain Stovall. And then now Colonel, I'm thinking, Captain then, 72, this is 81. Could he make it to Lieutenant Colonel by then? And the answer was yes. And he was there. And so it ended up, so we got the pilot, the co-pilot, the survivor, and me all at the Pentagon at the same time. And then the guy that wrote that book evidently got in touch with public affairs at the Pentagon, and I get a call from them, and they hooked us together, and he did interviews. Kevin ended up flying all four of us up to Boston, and he did interviews with us to use for his book.
Yeah.
And then since then, I went from the Pentagon. Oh, and on the 10th anniversary of that mission, we were at Girl Aikman's house, Lynn Aikman's house. I'm just going to say Lynn. At Lynn's house with his parents and his wife, and there was General Stovall, now General Stovall, and Rufus Hutchinson, and me and my wife. And Lynn's parents got Bill Stovall off to the side and said, "Thank you." In 10 years, Lynn had never discussed what happened with them. But he ended up in and out of the hospital for about a year. He stayed in. So that was that situation. So we kept running into each other off and on while we were stationed there. And I left there in 1985 and went down to Norfolk to work with the U.S. Atlantic Command. It was called U.S. Atlantic Command then. Now it's called JIFCOM. And I worked with the J6 IT Command Center support. I get this call one day. I says, "Captain McGrath." I got to tell you, it's fun being an Air Force captain on a Navy base. Because you say this is Captain McGrath, and they think you're an 06.
Yeah.
Anyhow, is this Chuck McGrath, PJ extraordinaire? Is Lynn Aikman. So he's in Iceland working at Com ISTAFOR, Command Iceland Defense Force. And he's working this deal. It ended up, I was part of a team that went up to install a whole set of equipment in the command center in Iceland. And so, we spent a lot of time together when I was up there for that. And then, we always just kept in touch. And then, all the way through to my family did a 70th birthday party for me, surprise party. And if you're ever in Virginia Beach, go to Warriors Tap House. It's right near the intersection of Dam Neck Boulevard and General Booth Boulevard. It's owned by a Navy SEAL and F-14 pilot, and I forget what the other guy did. And he and Sandy drove from Alabama up to Virginia Beach for that. That was awesome. Anyhow, then he came up for the opening of that exhibition at the U.S. Air Force Museum in Wright Pat. for the opening of that. Now, closing that whole loop, not in the Southeast Asia exhibit, but in the Cold War exhibit, they've got an MH-53, a Pavlo. That Pavlo, now Pavlo, was the bird that Stovall was flying when he picked Lynn and I up.
Really? Wow. So it was just kept getting used, upgraded, and then
It got upgraded to a Pavlo.
Yeah.
They took it over to the desert. After its final mission, they decided they were going to phase them out. They loaded it up, C5, and took it to Wright Pat.
Wow.
And we were all kind of curious, because if you look on the website and you look at the history of converting the HHs to MH to the Pavlo, it says on the website they reskinned them. And I said, I wonder. They didn't. Still got
Remember that hole?
Still got the patches.
Yeah.
Still got the patches.
That's awesome. You naturally segued a lot.
Yeah.
I would say, which is great.
Man, that was so easy.
Yeah.
Sorry, I did.
Yeah.
Right out. Do you have any words of advice for the current and future generation of PJs from all the stuff that you've been through? Obviously, you've been through quite a bit.
The one thing I'll say is what I started out with at the beginning. Never let somebody slack off. Because that guy might be the one to save your life. Or you might have to save his. That was the most serious injuries that I saw the whole time I was there. Yeah.
So I wanted to touch on that just a little bit. And I know this is a difficult topic, but it's a unique one. And I think younger PJs may be in a similar situation at one point, and like having to treat or recover, like a fellow PJ. What's that recovery like for you, and what advice might you have for those guys that may go through that similar situation?
Pay attention in school. It was when I found John, it was pretty automatic. John, I wasn't sure how well he could breathe. He was conscious. I could talk to him. As I got to him up on the hill, he was going like this, and I asked him if he could breathe, and he was okay, and I put a wrap and just put a big wrap, trying to keep it as open as I could around his mouth so he could still breathe, and started an IV. And it's funny when so I'm sitting there holding an IV bottle in my teeth. We had to literally, these were the old glass bottle IV. So I didn't have anything to hang it on to. I just had it in my teeth, and started the IV on him, and just opened that wide up. And then the Air America Huey came in, and but that's all it's, what with the training, it wasn't what do I do, is just do it.
Wow.
Yeah. And I didn't have any, after that, I had one save out in Hawaii where we went out to a cruise liner, picked up a guy with a bleeding ulcer. Nothing on that. Except it was kind of nice because the cruise line had everybody involved. Once the liner got to Honolulu and got in port, they invited absolutely everybody that was involved in the mission, from operations to the C-130s, just flying, escort and everything, and had us in for a big steak dinner on the ship and gave us a big tour, gave us cufflinks and pictures.
Yeah. Chuck, I appreciate your time, man, and it was a pleasure sitting down and getting these stories from you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, you're welcome.
Yeah.
It was great.
How long did we go?
I don't know.